When the king saw him, he said to his huntsman, "Now chase him all day long till nightfall. But take care that no one does him any harm." As soon as the sun had set, the king said to the huntsman, "Now come and show me the cottage in the wood." And when he was at the door, he knocked and called out, "Dear little sister, let me in." Then the door opened, and the king walked in. And there stood a maiden more lovely than any he had ever seen. The maiden was frightened when she saw, not her little roe, but a man come in who wore a golden crown upon his head. But the king looked kindly at her, stretched out his hand, and said, "Will you go with me to my palace and be my dear wife?" "Yes, indeed," answered the maiden, "but the little roe must go with me. I cannot leave him." The king said, "It shall stay with you as long as you live, and shall want nothing." Just then he came running in, and the sister again tied him with the cord of rushes, took it in her own hand, and went away with the king from the cottage. The king took the lovely maiden upon his horse and carried her to his palace, where the wedding was held with great pomp. She was now the queen, and they lived for a long time happily together. The roebuck was tended and cherished, and ran about in the palace garden. But the wicked stepmother, because of whom the children had gone out into the world, had never thought but that the sister had been torn to pieces by the wild beasts in the wood, and that the brother had been shot for a roebuck by the huntsman. Now when she heard that they were so happy, and so well off, envy and jealousy rose in her heart and left her no peace. And she thought of nothing but how she could bring them again to misfortune. Her own daughter, who was ugly as night, and had only one eye, reproached her and said, "A queen, that ought to have been my luck." "Just be quiet," answered the old woman, and comforted her by saying, "When the time comes I shall be ready." As time went on, the queen had a pretty little boy. And it happened that the king was out hunting. So the old witch took the form of the chambermaid, went into the room where the queen lay, and said to her, "Come, the bath is ready. It will do you good, and give you fresh strength. Make haste before it gets cold." Her daughter also was close by. So they carried the weakly queen into the bathroom, and put her into the bath. Then they shut the door and ran away. But in the bathroom they had made a fire of such hellish heat that the beautiful young queen was soon suffocated. When this was done, the old woman took her daughter, put a nightcap on her head, and laid her in bed in place of the queen. She gave her too the shape and look of the queen. Only she could not make good the lost eye. But in order that the king might not see it, she was to lie on the side on which she had no eye. In the evening when he came home and heard that he had a son, he was heartily glad, and was going to the bed of his dear wife to see how she was. But the old woman quickly called out, "For your life leave the curtains closed. The queen ought not to see the light yet, and must have rest." The king went away, and did not find out that a false queen was lying in the bed. But at midnight, when all slept, the nurse, who was sitting in the nursery by the cradle, and who was the only person awake, saw the door open and the true queen walk in. She took the child out of the cradle, laid it on her arm, and suckled it. Then she shook up its pillow, laid the child down again, and covered it with the little quilt. And she did not forget the roebuck, but went into the corner where it lay, and stroked its back. Then she went quite silently out of the door again. The next morning the nurse asked the guards whether anyone had come into the palace during the night. But they answered, "No, we have seen no one. She came thus many nights and never spoke a word." The nurse always saw her, but she did not dare to tell anyone about it. When some time had passed in this manner, the queen began to speak in the night, and said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? Twice shall I come, then never more." The nurse did not answer. But when the queen had gone again, went to the king and told him all. The king said, "Ah, God, what is this? Tomorrow night I will watch by the child." In the evening he went into the nursery. And at midnight the queen again appeared and said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? Once will I come, then never more." And she nursed the child as she was wont to do before she disappeared. The king dared not speak to her. But on the next night he watched again. Then she said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? This time I come, then never more." Then the king could not restrain himself. He sprang towards her, and said, "You can be none other than my dear wife." She answered, "Yes, I am your dear wife." And at the same moment she received life again. And by God's grace became fresh, rosy and full of health. Then she told the king the evil deed which the wicked witch and her daughter had been guilty of towards her. The king ordered both to be led before the judge. And the judgment was delivered against them. The daughter was taken into the forest where she was torn to pieces by wild beasts. But the witch was cast into the fire and miserably burnt. And as soon as she was burnt to ashes, the roebuck changed his shape and received his human form again. So the sister and brother lived happily together all their lives.